My name is Emily Green. I was born and raised in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Oregon. To outsiders, my family seemed to have it all. A house with a garden full of lavender, a neat white picket fence, and cozy dinners around the table. But inside, the reality was far from perfect. I was the firstborn of my parents, Greg and Sarah Green. They were both big believers in modern parenting. My dad, a software engineer with a deep love for numbers, always dreamed of having a child who was exceptional. My mom, on the other hand, was obsessed with the idea of perfect parenting. She once told her friends that she'd read over 40 books on child psychology before I was even born. I was raised with high expectations, constantly monitored and evaluated like a science experiment. But by the time I turned 3 and still couldn't count to 20 or write my name properly, my mom's disappointment was hard to ignore. One day, she looked at my dad and said, "Greg, I don't think she's capable of learning as quickly as we hoped. We need to do something before we miss the ideal developmental window." My dad just nodded, but I remember the way he looked at me. He didn't say a word, but his gaze made me feel like I was a problem that couldn't be fixed. When I was 4, my younger sister Lily was born. And from that moment, everything at home seemed to change. Mom transformed into someone else. Every corner of the house was filled with educational toys, flashcards, and learning tools you'd only see in elite schools. I remember one afternoon, I was quietly building with Legos in the corner when my mom passed by, glanced at me, and said, "Lily is only 7 months old, and she's already following complex instructions. You should keep playing." Lily had the best of everything: a fancy high chair with music, imported books from Europe, and a private tutor by the time she was 2. Me? I had worksheets, a short pencil, and daily reminders that I needed to try harder if I wanted to achieve anything. When I was 8, I won second place in the school's art competition. I was so proud and brought my painting home to show my parents. Mom glanced at it and said, "Well, Lily read an entire short story in English today." My dad didn't say anything. He was busy setting up a new logic puzzle for Lily. At that moment, I realized that nothing I did would ever be good enough to earn their praise. I was just a background figure in the family, quietly living in the shadow of my sister. The breaking point came when I turned 12. I had always loved my room, the upstairs one with the window that overlooked a small forest. It was the only space in the house where I felt truly myself. One evening, after finishing my homework, I was hanging a new drawing on the wall when Lily barged in and casually said, "Mom says I'm moving up here. This room is bigger and I need room for my new study corner." I stared at her, thinking it was some kind of joke. "No," I said firmly. "This is my room." Lily just shrugged and left. Less than 24 hours later, I came home from school to find my things packed up and moved to the small room next to the laundry room. My old room had been transformed, now filled with Lily's name on the door and all her new study equipment. I stood in my new room, small, cramped, and cold. The bed was too close to the wall, and the desk barely fit my books and a lamp. "Mom," I called out, "why would you do this? That was my room. I've had it since I was little." She didn't even look up from what she was doing. "You're older now. It's time for Lily to have it. Don't make a scene, Emily." I didn't argue. I walked back into my new room, shut the door, and sat down on the bed. The light from the hallway shone through the crack under the door, pale and unfamiliar. That was the moment I realized something I had never fully understood before. I was always an afterthought in my own family, even though I was the firstborn. By the time I reached high school, life at home still revolved around Lily. She was now a star student at a private school, getting chauffeured in a shiny new SUV, and had a tutor coming over twice a week. Meanwhile, I still went to the local public school, walked to class every day, and had to handle everything on my own, from my studies to extracurriculars. I never complained. I had grown used to staying out of the spotlight. But I wasn't prepared for the moment when everything I had endured at home came crashing down, right at the dinner table. That night, my grandparents, Robert and Mary, came over for dinner. They were the only ones in the family who ever made me feel seen. We were having Mom's lasagna when Lily started talking about her summer plans. She was going to a prestigious program at Stanford. "That's wonderful," my grandma said. Then she turned to me. "What about you, Emily? Have you thought about college yet?" I looked up, hopeful, finally feeling like I could share something of my own. I applied to the University of Oregon and UC Berkeley. I got into Oregon's business program on a partial scholarship. I'm just waiting to hear about more financial aid. Before I could say more, my mom slammed her fork and knife down. The sound echoed in the room. "Emily," she said, her voice tight, "your dad and I have talked. We can't help with your tuition this year." I blinked, shocked. My dad jumped in, as if they had rehearsed this moment. "We need to prioritize Lily. She's been accepted into an Ivy League prep program. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." My heart sank. All the college savings we'd discussed were now being used for Lily. I felt the floor beneath me drop. I sat there, stunned, as the weight of my parents' words settled in. My mind raced. They were cutting me off. No more college savings, no more financial support. And for what? To prioritize Lily's dreams. My mom sighed, a hint of frustration in her voice. "Emily, you might want to consider starting at a community college and then transferring later. Or taking some time to work. You'll figure it out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My entire life, I had been told that the college savings were meant for both of us, but now they were being shifted entirely to Lily. I looked at my grandparents, Robert and Mary, who were sitting quietly at the table. Grandma's face had softened with concern, while Grandpa sat, a stern expression on his face. My heart sank further. My mom was speaking as if I was a second choice. And Lily? She sat there, completely unaware of the impact of her actions. She just talked about her upcoming program as if everything was handed to her without a second thought. Grandma Mary, sensing the tension in the room, turned to me. "Emily, have you thought about applying to other scholarships? Maybe something outside the normal channels. There are opportunities out there that you might not have considered." I was grateful for Grandma's support, but I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. For all the years of doing everything right, of trying to meet their expectations, I was being cast aside. That evening, as I cleared the dishes from the table, Grandma came over to me. She placed her hand gently on my shoulder. "You don't have to carry this burden alone, Emily. We'll help you. All of it. Your college tuition, no loans, no strings attached." I looked at her, eyes filling with tears. "But Grandma, that's so much money. You don't have to do that." She smiled gently, her eyes filled with warmth. "We don't mind, sweetheart. This is an investment in someone who tries, someone who's always been willing to stand up for herself. You've earned it, and we believe in you." That was the moment I realized that my worth wasn't defined by my parents' approval or their financial backing. I didn't need their permission to succeed. I had earned my place through hard work and determination, and now I was being given the chance to go after my dreams without their interference. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I packed up my things, said goodbye to my parents, who offered nothing more than a half-hearted farewell, and moved into the dorms at the University of Oregon. My mom gave me a stiff hug at the door, muttering something about being frugal with my money. Lily barely looked up from her phone. As I walked away from the house, dragging my suitcase across the yard, I felt a strange mix of emotions. I was leaving behind a family that never truly saw me, but I was also walking toward a future that I could finally claim as my own. I no longer needed their validation. College was a whole new world. I wasn't the shy, overlooked daughter anymore. I was Emily Green, a business student with a strong mind and a relentless drive to succeed. Professors praised my critical thinking skills. My classmates came to me for help. It was as if I had finally found a place where my talents were recognized and valued. I immersed myself in my studies, working late nights in the library, spending hours at the campus cafe, learning about investment strategies and market behavior. It wasn't easy, but I was determined. And my grandparents, Robert and Mary, were there every step of the way, offering support, encouragement, and wisdom. In my senior year, I was referred to a highly competitive internship at a renowned investment firm in Seattle. I had the interview of a lifetime, and after a tense week of waiting, I was offered the position. I was over the moon. It was the first step toward my ultimate goal, a career in finance where I could make a real impact. That summer, as I worked at Bradley and Lane Capital, everything began to fall into place. I used my experience to learn everything I could about the industry, from risk assessments to shareholder reports. I started to think about the long-term picture and how I could contribute to the firm's future success. After my internship, I was offered a full-time position at the firm as a junior investment analyst. I poured my heart into my work, reading market trends, analyzing data, and developing strategies. It was exhausting, but it was also exactly what I had dreamed of. It was during a routine portfolio review that I made a discovery that would change everything. A group of tech stocks our firm had heavily invested in appeared to be showing signs of artificially inflated growth. After 2 sleepless nights combing through reports and numbers, I uncovered the truth. The companies were fabricating sales by buying their own products. I knew that if we didn't act fast, we would lose millions of dollars in client funds. So, I did what I had to do. I presented my findings, complete with a risk simulation model, to the executive board. The CFO was speechless, and the CEO looked at me with disbelief. "She just saved the company," he said. Within days, the entire portfolio was restructured, and 6 months later, the company reported an 11.4% growth, its highest in 7 years. After that moment, everything changed. I was promoted to lead investment strategist at Bradley & Lane Capital. But I didn't stop there. I was driven to prove that I was capable of so much more. I spent countless hours after work refining my analysis skills and developing a new system called Prism. It was a tool designed to predict market movements by factoring in things that others often overlooked: consumer behavior, global events, and social media trends. At first, it was just something I worked on in my spare time. But soon it started showing real promise. Prism wasn't the kind of tool the industry typically relied on. It was what some would call unquantifiable. But to me, it was an essential part of understanding the market. I began testing it with real data, and when it predicted price shifts in multiple major stocks, upper management took notice. Within a year, Prism was integrated into the firm's strategy, and it helped Bradley & Lane surpass 2 of its top competitors. The success was a validation of my work, and for the first time, I felt like I had found my place in the business world. It wasn't long before the CEO, Richard Langley, called me into the senior boardroom. I walked in, expecting a routine meeting, but instead he smiled and said, "Stephanie, we're creating an entirely new position, Chief Strategic Investment Officer. And no one is more deserving than you." I could hardly believe it. Just a few years ago, I had been told that I might want to work for a while and figure things out. Now, I was being given the opportunity to lead the firm's strategic direction. I had worked so hard to get to this point, but it still felt surreal. That evening, I didn't go out to celebrate with champagne or a lavish party. I went to my grandparents' house. They were the only ones who had truly believed in me from the start. Grandma was baking in the kitchen, and Grandpa was sitting in his favorite armchair. I handed them the letter of my promotion, and they both smiled with pride. "Little Stephanie," Grandpa said with a laugh, his eyes twinkling. "Now leading the way." I looked at them, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. For the first time in my life, I realized that I had succeeded not because of my family's approval, but because I had worked relentlessly to create my own path. And I hadn't needed anyone's permission to do so. As I left their house that night, I felt a wave of peace. I had arrived at a place where I didn't need to prove myself to anyone, especially not to the people who had tried to hold me back. I had made it on my own terms. However, not everyone shared my sense of accomplishment. My parents had been distant and unsupportive throughout my career, but I never expected that to change. Still, I hoped that they might recognize my success eventually. But when I mentioned the possibility of hosting a celebration for my promotion, my mother eagerly suggested, "Let us host it. We can make it more intimate, and the family can come together." I wasn't sure if I should agree, but part of me thought that maybe this was an opportunity to repair the rift. I transferred the money for the catering and decorations to my mother's account and thought I could finally have the celebration I deserved. But as the day approached, I started feeling uneasy. Something didn't feel right. When I arrived at my parents' house, I immediately noticed how lavish everything was. The house was decorated with extravagant flowers, and the scent of gourmet dishes filled the air. My grandparents were there, along with a few other relatives. But then, as I looked around, I saw Claire descending the stairs in a stunning red satin dress, with a man I didn't recognize by her side. The party had been completely hijacked. My mother stood up and beamed at the guests. "Dear family," she said, "we're not just here to celebrate Stephanie's promotion, but also to announce that Claire and Andrew are officially engaged." I froze. This wasn't my moment anymore. It was as if everything I had worked for had been overshadowed by Claire's engagement. I felt my heart drop. I turned to my mom, hoping this was some kind of joke, but her eyes passed right over me, as if I was invisible. It hit me then, this wasn't about me. It never had been. This was about Claire, as always. I stepped forward to make a toast, but my father intercepted me, gripping my wrist tightly. "Don't ruin this," he hissed, his voice sharp. "If you make a scene now, don't expect anything else from us. No contact, no inheritance, nothing." I pulled his hand off mine and, taking a deep breath, walked to the center of the room. "Excuse me, everyone. May I have just a moment?" I said, raising my champagne glass. All eyes turned toward me. I didn't know how I would say it, but I knew I couldn't let this moment pass without speaking my truth. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I stood tall, determined. I took a deep breath and continued. This gathering was meant to celebrate my promotion to Chief Strategic Investment Officer at Bradley & Lane, a major financial firm in Seattle. It was meant to be my moment, something I worked hard for. But instead, it has been turned into an engagement party for Claire. I paused, letting the words sink in. The murmurs in the room grew louder. My grandparents looked stunned. Everyone else, however, seemed more uncomfortable, unsure of how to react. "I'm not against Claire's engagement," I went on, trying to keep my voice steady. "But what I can't stay silent about is the fact that my own family has continually tried to erase me from my own celebrations, from my achievements. This isn't the first time, and I'm sure it won't be the last. My entire life, I've been in the background, and I've stayed quiet. But today, I can't stay quiet anymore." I turned to look at Claire, who stood frozen at the top of the stairs. Her face was a mixture of confusion and surprise. She hadn't expected this. "You told me this was just a family gathering," Andrew, her fiancé, said, his voice rising in disbelief. Claire's face flushed as she quickly tried to cover up. "Andrew, I just wanted to wait for the right time," she stammered, her eyes darting nervously between me and her fiancé. But Andrew wasn't having it. "So, you used your sister's money to stage your engagement reveal?" he asked, his voice lowering in frustration. He set his glass down firmly and walked out of the room, clearly fed up. Claire chased after him, but it was too late. He didn't even look back. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the house, leaving behind a heavy silence. I turned to face my family again. My father was livid. His face was bright red, his jaw clenched in anger. "You should know your place, Emily," he spat. "This is Claire's time. It's her moment. It's always been about her, and you need to understand that." I shook my head, the frustration building inside me. "No, it's not. This is about favoritism and neglect. You've always made me feel like I'm not enough. Always putting Claire first, always making me feel like a shadow in my own family." I turned to look at my grandparents. They hadn't moved, but I could see the understanding in their eyes. They knew exactly what I was talking about. Grandma Mary's gaze softened, and Grandpa Robert stood up slowly, walking toward me with determination. "David," Grandpa said, addressing my father, "if you're going to cut Emily out of this family, then it's time we clarify a few things." The room fell quiet. My mother's face turned ashen, and my father, though visibly shaken, didn't respond. Grandpa continued, his voice steady and unwavering. "We updated our will 3 months ago," he said. "The entire estate, the house, the savings, the shares, it's all going to Emily." The shock on my mother's face was immediate. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. What are you talking about?" she demanded. Grandpa Robert turned to face her, his expression firm. "We've seen enough," he said. "Enough to know who lives by their values and who has been living off the privileges of favoritism." My mother's anger flared. "Claire is my biological daughter," she said, her voice rising in fury. "Why her? Why Emily?" "Because she's the one who never demanded anything, never asked for special treatment," Grandma Mary replied, her voice calm but filled with authority. "Emily has always been the one who worked for everything she achieved. She doesn't live her life looking for handouts. That's why she deserves it." Claire, who had been standing quietly off to the side, now burst into tears. Her pride had shattered. She ran up the stairs in a rush, her red dress swirling behind her like a storm. My mother stood still, her face pale, her mouth trembling in disbelief. My father didn't even look at me. He just turned away, lost in his own fury. I felt no anger in me anymore. I felt nothing but relief. For the first time, I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their acknowledgement. The truth was out, and I was free from the weight of their expectations. As I stood there, clutching my purse, I turned to face my grandparents. Their eyes met mine, and in that moment I knew I had made the right choice. I didn't need them to prove my worth. "I never asked for this," I said softly. "I never needed the inheritance, but thank you." Grandpa Robert smiled, his eyes proud. "We know, Emily, and that's exactly why you deserve it more than anyone." I turned to leave, walking toward the door that had once been the symbol of my escape from this family. But this time, I wasn't walking away in defeat. I was walking away with my head held high. As I stepped outside, I felt the cool night air on my skin. The scent of apple blossoms from the garden filled the air. The door clicked shut behind me, and I knew that this time, it wasn't just another door closing. It was the end of a chapter I'd long outgrown. As I walked away from the house, I felt lighter than I had in years. My heart, which had been heavy with the weight of constant comparison and disregard, now felt at peace. I had finally chosen myself, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my own narrative. Over the years, I had come to terms with the fact that I couldn't change my parents. I couldn't force them to see me the way they saw Lily, but I didn't need their validation anymore. I had found my own worth, one that wasn't tied to their approval. And that, more than anything else, was what had set me free. I didn't hear much from my parents after that night. They never reached out, never acknowledged my success, but I wasn't surprised. What mattered now was that I no longer cared about their indifference. I had my grandparents, Robert and Mary, who had always believed in me, even when my own family had not. Every Sunday, I would visit their small house for dinner. Grandma would bake her famous apple pie, and Grandpa would pull out the old photo albums asking me to tell stories from my childhood, which he pretended to forget just so I could share them again. It was a simple life, but it was filled with love and support, things that had been missing from my parents' house for far too long. One day, while I was sitting with them, flipping through an old photo album, I asked them if they ever regretted leaving everything to me. I wasn't sure why I had asked it, but I needed to know. Grandma smiled gently and took my hand. "We didn't leave it because of what it was worth," she said. "We left it to the one who understands the value of choice. You've always chosen integrity over convenience, silence when it mattered, and speaking out when it counted. That's the real value we saw in you." I smiled through my tears. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. Years went by and life kept moving forward. I continued to thrive at Bradley and Lane. The work I did there, refining the Prism model and leading my team, brought new challenges and triumphs. And in my personal life, I finally found happiness on my own terms. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. But one spring afternoon, as I was leaving the office after a global strategy meeting, I noticed someone waiting in the lobby. It was Claire. She looked different, thinner, less sure of herself, but still dressed in her usual designer clothes. She looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to find the right words. "I'm not here to apologize," she said quickly, as if putting up a wall. "I just want to know how you're doing it. How you've done so well, without anyone lifting you up." I paused. It wasn't anger I felt. It wasn't even pity. It was simply a quiet understanding. "I learned to stand on my own, Claire. You've never had to do that." Claire stared at me, her eyes searching. She said nothing, turned, and walked away. I didn't follow her, nor did I feel the need to. As I walked back to my office, I realized that the person I had once been, the one who constantly sought approval and validation, was gone. I had learned to believe in myself. I had found my place in the world, not because of what others had given me, but because of what I had built for myself. And that was enough. If you found inspiration in Emily's journey of perseverance and self-discovery, remember that you too have the power to rise above challenges and define your own worth. Don't wait for validation from others. Believe in yourself and take the first step towards creating your own path today. Share your thoughts, take action, and don't let anyone hold you back from your dreams.